All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast. Taping this on a Tuesday night. My good friend, fellow University of North Georgia alumni, Matt Green, down there in Tequila, Georgia. Matt, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, sir. It's good to be back talking ball as we do every week. Sometimes on a little different schedule here in the off season.
Mm-hmm. It's trying to find the right time. So weekends are getting they can complicate. Like for instance, this weekend, my wife and I were getting away to Asheville. We're going deep into past Asheville, like a good cabin getaway from Saturday to Wednesday. So we're gonna be out in the wilderness and no pods for like a 4 to 5 day span here. Kind of recharge our batteries and get away for a little bit. But you know all about that. You're wearing a Smokies t-shirt right now. You're just kind of all in on Tennessee these days. I'm rubbing off on you, Matt Green.
That's right, up in Gatlinburg.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a good thing we didn't do it on Sunday because we had some late afternoon, early evening margaritas. The missus and I, and yeah, we were out for like 6 hours. We came home at I think got home at 6 and just. Oh, I'll take a nap for a little bit, out to 11 o'clock. It's
oh wow,
yeah. It was can't hang, like used to with the youngsters.
Did you go back to sleep? How do you do that? If you go to bed at 6 p.m. basically, and you get 6 hours, did you?
I had to make dinner. I got up, ate something, probably watched TV for a little bit. Probably fell asleep.
Then do you go back to sleep? So you're okay.
I mean, it's like a work day the next day. So I mean, you got to be on as on schedule as you can be.
Mm-hmm. I've never been a napper. I grew up refusing naps. Naps was never my deal. My wife is an expert napper. It's just not something I can do. I'll fight it to the end of times. It's not me. I don't get recharged by them. I'm in a worse mood if I take a nap because then I'm just that was a waste of time. I just burned an hour for nothing. I actually feel worse than how I felt earlier. Can't stand naps. I cannot stand.
It's a state of mind. You're just not. You're not cut out for it.
I'm really not. I'm really not. But also, Tennessee basketball is still alive here in the Sweet 16. The Lady Vols in the Sweet 16. Casual everything school things up here in Knoxville. But we all can't be everything school HQ. Matt Green. Spring practice is here.
The pretty good at everything school. You gotta respect that. It's a lot of respect to be pretty good at everything. I mean, some would like to be pretty good at everything. Someone win championships and Final Fours and that sort of thing too, So one day Tennessee will be there.
Very close. I think Tennessee's got a real shot at the Final Four.
The number 1 seed going down in your bracket.
Number 2 as well.
Definitely makes it a little bit easier of a road. Tennessee's got to be the favorite to come out of that region right now, right after beating Duke.
They are the betting favorite to come out of the region. But then if they come out of the region, they get Bama in the Final Four, which is not going to go well. They're not beating Bama. They already beat them once this year. Beating them twice.
Alabama, Tennessee, that could potentially put Alabama and Tennessee in one of the best rivalries in the country. If we got to see some classic Final Four game, football, basketball, I feel this is the rivalry that the rest of the country didn't really know about. It was Alabama's just kind of dominated Tennessee for so long. Obviously, I'm sure basketball's gone back and forth through the years, but yeah, it's that would be a pretty great matchup
for sure. So
my
fingers
long
crossed.
Shot bet of Kentucky is already it's already gone out the window. So who knows? That's why you take a long shot. Who knows what could happen.
That's fair. Matt Green, we're gonna start a little bit of a off-season pack conference review series, and we're not going to do the whole conference at once for some of these mega schools because that's a lot, and I don't want to do these 2.5 hour pods just going through all of them or not having the same energy for the beginning as I would for the end and that sort of thing. So we're going to start obviously with the SEC here, and we're going to do the SEC East first. So our SEC East Revisited series is what we're gonna call this, the Revisited series here. And I thought we could start. So we like a lot of different questions that I've been thinking about of like how I want to organize the show in a way that would be fun to kind of go back through this past year and what we think of just where the East is, what ended up happening last year, and just kind of doing some foreshadowing here with spring practice underway for I think just about everybody as of this week. So fun times, exciting times, and all that. And yeah, we can get right into it, Matt Green. I want to start by asking you this question: who overachieved last year in the SEC East, in your estimation? Who overachieved your expectations in 2022?
Well, in terms of my expectations or just kind of, just overachieved in general, I think South Carolina is probably the easy answer here because the Tennessee and South Clemson games to end the season, it kind of gave a different appearance on how good their season truly was. However, they did beat Tennessee and Clemson, and those were two just massive wins for their program. So they did still do that. So it's like I have to give them credit. South Carolina winning 8 games, it's not necessarily overachieving because it's like that feels like about their ceiling or so. I kind of look at Vanderbilt because you look at them and they went 5-7 last year. It almost feels like kind of South Carolina did in 2021. Like they kind of only the good wins they had were more indictments on the teams that they beat, like just for Kentucky to lose to Vanderbilt, for Florida to lose to Vanderbilt, it was definitely more on those teams than truly Vanderbilt being as good as a 5-win team. Like you're 5-7 at Vanderbilt, that's almost the ceiling. Like going to a bowl game is obviously the ceiling, but it's 5-7. I don't even think they were that good last year. It's like those are their only 2 conference wins. So I feel like 5-7 kind of makes you feel good. Like, oh, Clark Lee's definitely the guy. He can actually make us respectable or whatever. And they 5-7 is good for Vanderbilt, but I don't even truly think they were that good. I think it was just a really bad day for Florida to lose to someone like Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt's actually my pick. Getting 5-7 for Vandy last year, I think it's a huge win. I think they overachieved, especially with that talent and what that offense looked like most weeks. I think for them to even beat Kentucky and Florida in the same year and back to back is pretty bonkers. To be in a position to make a bowl game against Tennessee, where some folks were picking them to beat Tennessee to make that bowl game because Tennessee was reeling after a South Carolina loss. No, that game ended up being 56-0. So this is how weird Vanderbilt's 2022 season was. They crush Hawaii 63-10. They beat Elon. They gave up 31 points to Elon at home, Matt Green. They go 42-31 there. They get crushed, 45 points given up against Wake at home. They lose that one. They go to Northern Illinois and just survive that one, 38-28. They proceed to give up 55 points to Bama, 52 to Mississippi, and 55 to Georgia. And I mean, just an unbelievable 3-week stretch where you were like, okay, well, season's over. Like this is rough. This is like same old Vanderbilt. And then they barely lose to Mizzou. They lose by 3 points. They're right there against South Carolina. Like most teams would have crumbled, giving up 150 points in conference over a 3-week span. They didn't crumble up until the other 55-point burger that Tennessee laid on them at the end of the year. But I don't know if you're a Vandy fan, this is about like exactly what you want, where you steal a couple SEC East games. You hopefully don't lose any of your non-conference games like the Wake one, but that's kind of turning into a little rivalry anyway. Like that's most years should go back and forth or something like that. And then you're like 6-6, 7-5, best case scenario. But I don't know. I think if you're looking at like the best case scenario for what Clark League can build, I think last year was a really good example of what that could actually be. And he got there in year 2.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because you beat Florida and everything, but I'm honestly surprised. I thought you would definitely say South Carolina was the most overachieving team.
No, because South Carolina was bad for most of the year. And 8-4 in the regular season is not really overachieving. Like, based on what they want to be and what they were talent-wise, I mean, I don't think that's crazy. I was pretty down, too, on Kentucky going into the year. I didn't like the Rich Scangarello hire, losing Cohen. I didn't trust Kentucky's offensive line. I thought they would be suspect. I thought they would take a step back. But South Carolina is probably a good number 2 in that context. But I will also say Tennessee overachieved in 2022, Matt Green. Year 2, still not where they want to be scholarship-wise. They didn't have a lot of talent on defense. The defense wasn't even close to being on the... They got to number 1 in the freaking country in year 2 under Josh Heupel. Like, when we talk about ahead of schedule...
Yeah, but that was clearly a mistake.
No, it wasn't a mistake because they were kicking the crap out of everyone they were playing. They had the best offense in college football when it was all said and done. Hendon Hooker, if he doesn't get hurt in the South Carolina game, he's probably a Heisman finalist. They're going to have 5 guys go in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. We might get 4 in the first round, 4 in the top 45, no matter what. Like, you look across the board, like Heupel had so many guys that it just exploded for him this past year. And to even be in the conversation in Athens, where it's like the game of the year for the Dogs in the regular season. Yeah, it didn't go your way, but like, this is year 2. Like, they don't have the dog. They were running out of corners. They were running out of safeties, Matt Green. The talent level on the defensive side of the ball is not anywhere close to where it needs to be. And I mean, there is so much talent in spring ball this week. Whoo! We got some linebackers, folks. Arian Carter, he's gonna be a dog. He's got that dog in him. And Evan Hobbs and some big transfers.
Let's stay focused.
Yeah, sorry. I just I'm blacking out here a little bit. But I think it's fair. I think you have to throw in Tennessee as a team that overachieved based on the talent they actually had in the building. I think Heupel maximized having a pretty bad defense and still getting to number 1 in the country at one point in the year, still finishing as a top 7 team in the country at this point in his program development. That's an overachievement. 11 wins. No one had Tennessee at 11 wins before the year. No one. Their over-under was like 7.5.
See, the 10-win regular season, though, I don't feel like it's that surprising. It's because it was kind of, they're going to be really good. You look at what their schedule was. It's like LSU. Yeah, that's a big time win.
Crushed LSU on the road.
I'm saying that's a big time win. But outside of that, you probably assume,
you beat Alabama at home.
They lose to Alabama, lose to Georgia, and go 10-2. That's probably what you expected. Like, as
not me.
Best case
not on this podcast, Matt Green. Who said before the year that there was no doubt in my mind they were splitting Georgia, Alabama?
You did say that, and you said they do something dumb like lose to South Carolina.
Do I not know the Tennessee Volunteers?
You were all over that. So the loss to South Carolina is what makes it kind of hard to call it overachieving, because it's like that's a game that puts you in the college football playoff, like if you win, honestly. So I think it's just it's hard to call it overachieving. I know what you're saying, year 2, but we've seen a lot of guys, year 2 is when teams can, compete for a national title. So, I don't think it's outrageous to think, Tennessee from going where they are to, number 7 in the country was obviously a huge season. I just don't know if it's overachieving. Kind of makes it seem like it's not sustainable. Like, it's like you're not going to see like a continuous, like, this is who they are going into 2023. Like, that's how I feel more about Vanderbilt and South Carolina, where it's like they overachieved because they're not really this good, and they're going to probably take a step back in 2023. Like Tennessee, you could apply the same logic to Tennessee and say that they truly did overachieve, and they arrived like maybe a year before their recruiting and things like that were really ready, and maybe they go back to being an 8 or 9 win team next year, but doesn't necessarily mean Heupel isn't like a good coach or anything. Maybe they truly did overachieve in 2022.
Yeah, I think 24 is the year I've got circled as where they have the best chance of making Atlanta and getting over that hump. I think when you get a lot of these defensive guys from this 2023 class that was super 5-star, 4-star defensive heavy, I think when you get more, like, you get 2 cycles of those guys across the defensive line, across the secondary, across the linebacking core, and then with the talent they have out wide and the running back room and then just Nico being a sophomore, and his upside, I think that's when you're like, all right, this is when all the pieces come together for another deep CFP run. I think this year is kind of a step back, but I think it's less about like peak and what the program can be. And like, I think if the roster was stagnant and this was like what he had last year, I think was an overachievement, but the roster's gonna be different this year. Players come and go, you like transfers, recruiting. Like, I think based on the personnel that Heupel had just in 2022 and 2022 alone, I think it was an overachievement to win 11 games with that group. And I think there are a lot of coaches in college football that would not have been able to get 11 wins and beat Alabama and beat Clemson, and crush LSU on the road with the personnel that Josh Heupel had because of his scheme and because he's just a really good coach. And Tennessee got a lot of buy-in across the board. I think they played above their heads based on their talent level.
I think, I think that's fair.
Well, there you go. Look at that. Matt Green coming on board with the Tennessee overachievement. Who underachieved?
Because they should never expect to actually be top 10. Like, that's just crazy.
Okay.
You're just not there.
Okay. You just had to go. You had to
also,
get that last
word. For those of you wondering, I know you were a really huge World Baseball Classic guy, Chase Thomas. Shohei Ohtani just closed it out. Struck out Mike Trout actually to
his teammate.
Close it out for Japan for the World Baseball Classic. So can't be mad. Everyone
they were the favorites coming in.
Yeah, 3-2 final score.
There you go.
What can you do?
Matt Green, who underachieved the most in the SEC East this year?
I feel like it's hard to say, right? Because Florida, it's year one of Billy Napier, but if this guy, Anthony Richardson, NFL scouts have been wrong before, but if this guy, Anthony Richardson, really was this generational combination of Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton, my eyes have just been lying to me the whole time. If this guy truly is that good and that talented, then it's kind of an indictment on your program to go 6-7 with this guy at quarterback. Like, did you not know how to use him? Like, Cam Newton rushed for like 1,400 yards his 1 year at Auburn. I think Lamar Jackson, did he rush for like 1,700 yards 1 year? I'm not even sure. Like, he had like 3,000 plus yard seasons. Like, just doing ridiculous things in the running game. Like, so if Anthony Richardson is this true freak, like, I mean, he appears to be, we've seen his flash plays, right? Like, why wasn't he putting up Nick Fitzgerald numbers? You know what I mean? Like, why was he not just getting just ridden like in the running game? So I think if you look at Florida, you got to think like, is our quarterback going to be better after losing a guy who's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft? Like, probably not. So was this guy actually propping us up for how bad we really were? Like, that is possible. Like, I don't think Anthony Richardson was great, but it's possible that the rest of the team was kind of keeping him down. And I mean, the offense wasn't terrible. They had a decent running game, but it was more on the defensive side of the ball. But I don't know. If you look at Florida, like, if that's the talent level you truly lost as like an NFL quarterback, like, you'd have to say that's underachieving to go 6-7.
That's fair. So
it is year one.
Florida was my number 2 pick here. I think it's Kentucky for me. Kentucky has another top 5 quarterback here, Will Levis, but he's shown more. Anthony Richardson has started 13 total games now as a quarterback. He was completely green when he took over. Like, just there's all kinds of reasons. Like, they were super depleted the receiving game. Like, he really ran out of receivers towards the end of last year. Just look, guys were in and out. They kind of had the season from hell. Year one for Billy Napier. A lot of new faces, new scheme, moving on from Dan Mullen. Like, hey, I'll give us some passes there. I'm not going to throw them in there for that. Kentucky, like, yes, you lost Liam Cohen, but you still had talent. You still had a bunch of talent, specifically on defense. You have a quarterback who we saw in 2021 could have been a Heisman-type quarterback in 2022. I understand the offensive line was a huge problem. I watched a lot of Kentucky games. It was bad. They couldn't run the ball. That was an issue. Stoops loves running the ball. Couldn't do that. They had the superstar wideout and Brown, who was the lone bright spot on that offense week in, week out. But like Matt Green, they had a worse passing offense in Florida. They were 95th in the country in passing offense. Like, that just can't happen with a quarterback like Will Levis. And you look at some of the losses and how their season went. You end it 21-0 blanked by Iowa. Iowa? The Iowa we just saw, like that's brutal. It's a brutal way to lose. You barely squeak by at Mizzou. You lose to Vanderbilt at home. I don't care what kind of season from hell you're having. Kentucky's past losing to Vanderbilt at home. Like that can't happen. Tennessee murders you when you come into Knoxville 44-6. You lose to South Carolina at home. You barely beat Northern Illinois at home, 31-23. I think all year long, I mean, you had the horrible mess ups in the Ole Miss game. I remember us talking about it the week after or the day after. It was like, what in the world? Kentucky blew that game.
They blew that win and right there at the end.
Yeah. I think for me, it's no question Kentucky's the most underachieving 2022 team in the SEC East. I think just everything went wrong, but they should have been a lot better than what they were. There was no excuse for that kind of fall.
They were my second. I think you may have convinced me because not only it's almost the exact same logic that applies to Florida. Like if you had this top 10 draft pick, apparently at quarterback, and this guy looked bad, like in college, like if this guy's truly that good, then it's probably an indictment on your offense for this guy looking bad. And he was sacked like 45 times. Like you absolutely wasted a really good quarterback talent in I'm blanking on his name right now. Will Levis.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll be better for Devin Leary. Like we'll see. I wanted to call him Devin Leary for a second. I was blanking. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, the Ole Miss game, that's a good point because I forgot that the way they just let that game get away from them. And then, to lose to Vanderbilt is just never acceptable. But that goes for Florida and Kentucky last year. But in the fact that it wasn't year one, like this is Mark Stoops, the most established coach. Is he the second most tenured to Saban in the SEC? I want to say
he's got to be right.
He's been there like a decade. So yeah, I mean, this isn't a new thing. So with the SEC East being what it was, obviously it had a second, college football playoff contender this year. So the SEC East is probably the strongest it's been this year, than it's been in 5-10 years. So to have that second elite program in the conference. So it wasn't completely up for grabs, but for Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, there's no reason Kentucky shouldn't have been the third best team in the East with everything they had going on. So yeah, I can definitely say Kentucky was a huge underachiever.
The best game for you among SEC East teams in 2022 was what for you, Matt Green?
The best game, I would have to go with Georgia, Missouri.
That's my pick, actually.
That was the champ was on the ropes. Georgia, Missouri led. They scored first in that game. They led basically until 4 minutes left in the game. It was like a field goal contest there. Missouri's kicker was absolutely just balling. What was he, like 5 for 5 in that game? Really getting his showmanship on, if I remember correctly. But yeah, Georgia just couldn't seem to get in the end zone. That was one of the games I feel like people worried about a lot, like moving forward because of the red zone offense from that game. But I felt like the second half of this game, I want to say this was really the game that Dejon Edwards became part of Georgia's offense. He had 11 carries for 49 yards in this one. And he felt like, to that point, I don't know if you remember, like Kenny McIntosh, he was doing a lot in the receiving game, but he had 30 rushing yards in the first 4 or 5 games of the season or something. Most of what he was doing was through the pass, and Georgia just wasn't dominant running the ball the first few weeks. I felt like the Missouri game, second half of the Missouri game, is really when Georgia finally they were a good running team from that point on in the season. And after all the field goals, throughout the game, they needed 2 touchdown drives at the end, and Stetson let them down the field. So it was that was a big time game. That Malachi Starks chasing that dude down and tackling him at the 1, that was one of the plays of the season because that was a 60-yard run that stopped him at the 1. I think Georgia ended up getting a field goal out of it. And so that was a big time game. Georgia preserve the undefeated season.
I like that one. For me, I am going to throw out Florida, Tennessee. Florida, Tennessee I'm glad I was there for that. Like, there were doubts, but because I've also got that dog in me, I made it through. It was a couple days after my wedding. I got back from the honeymoon and they were like, Chase, you're going to do it? And it's like, ride or die. I'll be there. And here's the other caveat here. Had a broken foot. It was in a lot of pain. Guess who went to Neyland Stadium, walked around, tailgated.
I forgot about that.
Oh, yeah, Matt Green. With a broken freaking foot. That I still made it into Neyland Stadium for Tennessee, Florida. The best kind of SEC matchups are the ones where when you get to the stadium or like you get to campus and you can just feel everyone's tense. Like everyone was tense around Neyland that day. Like everyone was like, they should win this game. But there was not like a Heupel has to win this game, but there was like a Heupel has to win this game. Like at home, because if he doesn't do it this year, we're not going to pick him to do it next year at Florida. Like those are always just, they never go well for Tennessee on the road in the swamp. So you're like, are you really going to start out 0-3 against Florida here? And it was so tense coming in. And then you have the game where Tennessee's doing whatever they can to get up big, and they're playing okay. Anthony Richardson can't get sacked. Like we're all just apoplectic in the stands. Like he just can't bring him down. And of course, late in the second half, you know how it goes. Like Florida comes roaring back late, and they have a chance to win. Like they have the ball with the opportunity with Anthony
onside kick there at the
yes,
end.
they get that back, and you're like, oh my God, like this is actually going to happen. They're not going to get the monkey off their back here. And it doesn't happen. The miracle doesn't happen from Richardson and company on the last play of the game. But like that one was one of those, like, yeah, Bama was fun, but I think Florida is kind of forgotten among the 2022 season for Tennessee, because I think if they don't get over that hump, I don't know if Bama happens. I don't know if the rest of the season doesn't go the way that it went, because you beat Florida early in the year and you're just like, all right, we can breathe. Like they beat Florida at home like they were supposed to. And that, hey, now we feel like we can actually hang with anybody. We can just move forward, and we've turned the page on that rivalry, and we actually feel like we have the upper hand as the number 2 team in the East. I think that was sneakily the best SEC East game of last year outside of Georgia Mizzou.
Well, and you got to throw in Georgia, Tennessee too, because
that game wasn't good.
The actual atmosphere and the stakes, like number 1 versus number 3. I mean, literally number 1 versus number 1 because of number 1 in the 2 different polls. Like that was like the biggest game I can honestly ever remember as a Georgia fan in Sanford Stadium specifically. Like that's the biggest kind of buildup I can remember to a game. Like it's up there with like the Notre Dame game was huge because of the novelty of Notre Dame coming to Athens, and it was a great game last time they played. But it was like number 5 versus number 9 or something like that. Like Alabama, the blackout. I mean, Alabama obviously the reigning game. Like that was a big game, but it was like, yeah, the rankings say this is a big game, but Georgia doesn't really know if they're even a good team right now in 2015, even though they were favored over Bama for some reason. But yeah, the blackout game was like a huge atmosphere. But the level of confidence that Georgia now has and Georgia fans now have, it's like you're talking about that nervousness. It's like that's what Georgia fans have always been. This is like a game where you're going up against the number 1 team. And you're like, I feel like we're better than them. You know, it's like that's Georgia fans are never really in that position. So it's like it's a new time for Georgia fans, and also the people talking about it not being that loud of a stadium, you know, that just kind of adding fuel to the fire. So the national buildup to that game and College Game Day and everything, that was obviously just a massive game. And then it's remembered as being more of a blowout, obviously, but there's definitely some the Jalen Carter play in the end zone and like Ladd McConkey's first touchdown, and even that Stetson Bennett rushing touchdown. That's probably one of his more iconic plays in his entire career, and throwing up the phone gesture after it. So that was just a massive game just for the actual like the stakes of the actual game. Like the Tennessee, like that was like when was the last time an SEC East game? I mean, I guess the Dan Mullen and Kirby had some top 10 matchups, but like a true like top 5 matchup, like I don't know. I don't think like Florida, if you go back to like Georgia, Florida, like 2012, where they both finished like top 5. And I don't know if they were top 5 at the time that they played. I think Florida was number 2, but
Wait, where was Florida, Georgia in 2020?
2020, Georgia had lost to Alabama already at that point, and Florida was sitting on at least had 2 losses they had 1 loss at that point.
Okay,
because they lost to LSU and Alabama after. Wait, so they may have had 2 losses, right? Because they went 8-4 that year. So they lost to Ole Miss. I want to say Ole Miss and A&M.
I think Ole Miss was the opener because remember they started right.
They beat Ole Miss.
Okay, that was the opener. I know Florida played Ole Miss to start off the season.
I gotta pull up Florida's schedule.
They lost to A&M though. I remember that. That was at A&M.
Because A&M went like 10-1 or whatever.
Yes.
They definitely. Okay, so that was their only loss. Oh, and then they lost the bowl game. So yeah, so they lost LSU, Alabama, Oklahoma to end. So yeah, they only had 1 loss going into that Georgia game.
Yeah, I think they were top 7, top 10 somewhere at that point in that game. That was a top 10 matchup, 2 top 10 teams.
I would say it was 2 top 10. That was definitely wasn't 2 top 5 though.
Okay.
But yeah, because I know back in 2012, I want to say Florida, that was Florida's only loss in 2012. And so I'm pretty sure they were number 2 going into that game. And Georgia's only loss, Georgia had just been blown out, I think, by South Carolina that year with Clowney. So I don't know if they were they were definitely top 10, but I don't know if they were top 5 at that point. So yeah, we were trying to rack our brains, I think last year when it happened. I think that was the first time Georgia had ever hosted a number 1 team in the country, like as a top 5 team, like ever. So it was just massive stakes for sure.
For sure.
And a hell of a game, hell of a rewatch game too.
Yeah, there you go. Matt Green.
By the way, Georgia was number 5 and Florida was number 8 going into 2020.
See, there you go. I knew that was like a top 2 matchup. That was a big one at the time. I remember. I think that would have been bigger too in not 2020 with the COVID year and just fans and all that.
Well, in 2019 and 2018 were both huge. Those were both top 10 matchups for sure. So like that was.
Well, it's kind of like the last ride though, because Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitts, and that group, they felt like they could actually make the CFP.
We didn't know it was the last ride. We thought Bowl was finally hitting his stride.
No, I'm saying with the talent, like the guys who were going to the NFL draft, like losing Pitts, who was just unguardable, and losing Kyle Trask, who was turning into a really good player. I don't know.
And Tony on the team as well.
For sure. Matt Green, should these fans expect the 2023 result for their team most years? Starting 1 through 7, Matt Green. We can run through this part quickly, but I'm going to ask you.
Oh, yeah. If you want to tell everyone what everyone finished real quick, where they finished in their spot.
Do you have it in front of you? Hold on.
Yeah, I have it in front of me.
I got it now. So Georgia 15-0, Tennessee 11-2, South Carolina 8-5, Kentucky 7-6, Florida 6-7, Mizzou 6-7, Vanderbilt 5-7, and then conference-wise, Georgia 8-0, Tennessee 6-2, South Carolina 4-4, Kentucky 3-5, Florida 3-5, Missouri 3-5, and Vanderbilt 2-6. So let's start with number 1. Georgia fans, should they expect 2023 type results every year?
See, I wasn't thinking necessarily 2023 results every year. Like, I mean, Georgia fans are going to think they can go undefeated every year, right? They're going to be favored in most games every year, but that's outlandish to expect your team to go undefeated every single year. But in terms of expecting to be number 1 in the SEC East, we know things are going to happen and you can't do it every single year, but there's no reason why Georgia fans shouldn't expect to finish first in the SEC East every single year.
Tennessee, should fans expect similar results that they had in 2022 every year from now on?
Yeah, I think there's no reason to think Tennessee shouldn't be able to finish second in the SEC East. Like your team, like where you're at, like you're wanting to compete for the conference title. So obviously, I mean, shoot, this is like the last year we're going to do this, right? Like SEC East, who knows what we're going to call it moving forward. But so, I mean, there's no reason to think Tennessee shouldn't be right there. Like number 2, like they think they can be number 1. So I think number 2, like in your off years where you can't win the division, I think that's reasonable for Tennessee.
I've always said there's no reason Tennessee can't be Clemson. Like that's who you can be. Like Clemson, same kind of players. You can get the best of the best in North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, some Florida, some Georgia, and obviously lock down the state of Tennessee and maybe a couple in Alabama. That's doable. Kind of like what Clemson does, where they cherry pick around the Southeast and a lot, because you're in the middle of a lot of spots and you can do that. Tennessee has the money. They can beat Clemson. They also beat Clemson. So I think they're their most natural, like, creme de la creme rival, where it's like, no, if Clemson can be Clemson, Tennessee can be Tennessee. Clemson does not have any more inherent advantages that Tennessee does not have.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
South Carolina.
The one thing is Clemson doesn't have to play in the SEC, so
That's
they
true.
can get their level of talent.
Not yet.
The level of talent, I mean, you look at what some of Clemson's classes are. Like they're signing the best classes in the ACC, but they're signing the 10th, 11th classes in the country sometimes, 15th. Like
Yeah.
That, I don't, not to be an SEC homer, but that wouldn't cut it if you're consistently the 6th, 7th, highest ranked recruiting team in the SEC. Like that's the kind of thing Dan Mullen got fired for, like Mark Richt, like wasn't good enough for. So, and not that Dan Mullen was even doing as well as Mark Richt, but both of what those guys were doing, like Clemson was able to win ACC titles. Like Tennessee, they're going to have to do a little bit better than Clemson's recruiting, I think, to win SEC titles consistently.
South Carolina, Matt Green.
I think 3rd is a little much. I think South Carolina, it almost feels like you're ceiling right now. Like I know they won the division in 2010, like had back-to-back 11-win seasons. But that was Steve Spurrier, and that was a long time ago. And that was before Clemson became a national powerhouse. That was before Georgia became a national powerhouse. And when those two teams are as good as they are, it's kind of like what Auburn is facing, what Tennessee is facing with I mean, I guess all those teams that were playing Georgia, but with going with Alabama and with Clemson. So South Carolina, it's like they should be thrilled with finishing 3rd, because I'm not sure how many years they can recreate that. So 3rd, it's hard to say. It's like it shouldn't be their expectation. So, but I don't think that they're going to be finishing 3rd most years.
I like it.
But if you met a South Carolina fan on the street and he's like, "Hey, what are your expectations next year?" I just want to finish 3rd in the East. I'd be like, that's pretty reasonable. Like
they think they can win the East next year.
I don't think South Carolina fans truly think they can win the East next year.
I do. You should hop on twitter.com, Matt Green.
The people on Twitter are another story.
Kentucky.
In terms of win-loss record, I think they can expect better, but I kind of interpreted what you wrote in terms of finish as 4th in the East, and Kentucky finishing 4th in the East seems right on par. I'm sure they think they're better than that because they have been. They've had 9-win seasons, 10-win seasons, but I think 4th in the East is pretty reasonable because most years you do have, I mean, maybe not statistically, but it feels like at least kind of historically that you've had at least 2 really good teams in the SEC East, right? Like whether it was Tennessee and Florida at the top for years or Georgia and Florida at the top, and maybe now Georgia and Tennessee at the top. Like you've had at least 2 good teams, and Kentucky is never going to be one of those 2 that's like truly contending for a playoff spot or something. They obviously started like 8-0 or whatever it was in 2021, but it's like, did we ever really take it that seriously? Like it's still Kentucky, and it's like they're like, yeah, the 3rd, 4th best team in the SEC East seems about right. 7-6, they can do better than that, but 4th, that seems right.
I think they can do better. I think Kentucky can be like somewhere in between second and third in most years. I think they've built a pretty solid foundation, and I think there is enough there where I'm like, I think Kentucky fans should expect to be like the tier 2 team.
I feel like the only way they can be second or third is if Florida and Tennessee aren't taking care of business, honestly. Like Florida and Tennessee have to be just
I don't think it has to
doing
be
a bad
Tennessee. I think it just has to be Florida.
But to be second, I think it's a combination of both. Like they get to second, like I think it's Tennessee and Florida both not being as good as they should.
I mean, maybe not even just be second, but like the Tennessee game decides if you're second. Or you're right there, and if you beat Tennessee, then
no, I hear you. It's not unreasonable because they've been that, and they've gone back and forth. That Florida Kentucky feels like the last 5-10 years has become like kind of a rivalry, even though maybe they've beaten them twice. I'm not even sure. They've beaten them like twice in like the last 35 years or something, but they've all been recent, and all the games recently have been close too. So that feels like it's been kind of a low key rivalry, but it's like, even when they're playing with Florida, it's like it feels like this is a bad Florida team that's allowing Kentucky to play with them. You know what I mean? It's like it's because Florida isn't reaching where they should be for Kentucky to get up to second or third. So I feel like fourth, it's like, yeah, that's probably about where they should be.
That's fair. Mizzou, Matt Green.
Wait, you skipped Florida.
Oh, I did. We've been talking about Florida. Okay, yeah, Florida. Florida down that low is like, you forget that they were down that low.
Yeah, the original thing I wrote when I saw this question was basically everyone was right except for Florida and South Carolina. Probably just switched. Like Florida shouldn't be kind of expecting to be third. They really should be expecting to be, at the top of the SEC East. But with what's happened in recent years and kind of, recalibrating expectations, like third is the floor for someone like Florida. Like you're competing for the SEC East, or you're right behind the two good teams that year. They're just one of those. It's in our lifetime, at least, Florida is just always a perennial contender. So to see them down at fifth in the SEC East, I don't know that they're going to get out of it because, this is year 2. Is Billy Napier the guy? Like, we still don't know. We don't know what they have coming back in 2023. So I don't know that they should expect, being at the top in 2023, but they should definitely be expecting better than fifth place in a 6-7 record.
That's fair. But I will say, and you and I have talked about this in this show before, and that you remove the Spurrier and Urban Meyer years, they shouldn't be you wouldn't expect them to be at the tier 2 competing for SEC titles year in, year out. By and large.
No, that's true. Like, they've been playing football for like 120 years, and like 20 years of it is elite of elite, but there's a lot of other years that are, there's a reason, you look at those all-time wins leaders, it's like Florida's down there at like 25 or so all time. Like they don't necessarily have the longest history. And there is a chance that they got 2 Hall of Fame coaches and they're never going to be able to match that ever again. That Urban Meyer and Steve Spurrier truly will be the greatest coaches they ever have. But that doesn't mean another guy can't win a national title or they can't get back to at least, we saw Dan Mullen. They had finished top 10 3 years in a row. So like we've seen Florida at least recently, like Jim McElwain, they go from not making a bowl game to winning the East 2 years in a row. It feels like a job that's been a quick fix every time they've hired a new guy. So that's why you got year 2 of Napier. It feels real important.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm also betting against it. I think they're going to be close to where they were this past year, maybe even worse.
It's not an easy schedule for sure.
Mizzou, maybe the biggest wild card in 2023. I mean, they almost beat Georgia, but that's at home, and then they got to go back to Athens this fall. I don't think it's going to go well for them there.
You don't just go into Como and walk out with an easy victory. It's a real tough place to play.
No,
Georgia's had some great moments in the few years of Missouri being in the conference. They've had some memorable moments at Missouri.
They're a sneaky rival. Remember, Mizzou comes into the East and they immediately start winning the East, and it's like, oh, this might be a Mizzou thing. And then it's like,
And there
no,
was
it's
the
not.
Jarvis Jones game where he just absolutely took over the grown man football when was it Sheldon Richardson, I want to say. Georgia plays like old man football. And so that was their first game in the SEC too. So it was Georgia. So it was like, I feel like it was a big time environment. The Jacob Eason to Isaiah McKenzie on 4th down at Missouri, like, was a big one. Like, even Nick Chubb's coming out party was against Missouri when Gurley got suspended. So yeah, there's been some good moments at Missouri, and then obviously this past year.
6 and 7. I think they're the easiest to forecast. I think this is absolutely where Mizzou fans should expect them to be year in, year out. I think this is the most obvious one to me of the group. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. So you're better than Vanderbilt, 100%.
Yeah.
You're honestly significantly better than Vanderbilt, but that's not significant in the standings. You should expect about 5th or 6th place. Like, there's no reason they can't be better than South Carolina year in or like in some years. Like, I mean, Missouri's had a tradition of being like a decent football program. So they've won the East more recently than
they always have a couple 5-stars.
I guess almost anybody.
Like Luther Burden. I mean, Tennessee just got their best player in the state this past year in Chandavian Bradley, the edge guy. But I mean, talent comes out of there. Dorial Green Beckham. For whatever reason, there's always like a 5-star who comes out of St. Louis or just Missouri as a whole. And you're like, okay, that's like keeping Mizzou afloat, is like the random 5-stars that stay home.
But yeah, it's like, that's not going to be enough, just getting the talent in Missouri. Like, that's cool.
We're locking down our borders, and it's like,
yeah, it's like, yeah, that's a good thing to do, but you're probably going to have to get a lot of guys from other places like Texas and Florida and things like that. But yeah, I mean, Missouri, you can expect better than 6th, but not like
they're never winning the SEC, right? Like, can we just go ahead and say that?
Drew Lock? I mean, they were.
No, I'm saying winning the SEC. Do they ever win the SEC in our lifetime?
I mean, the odds are definitely getting stacked against them with Oklahoma and Texas now joining the conference. But no, I would say it's pretty unlikely that they ever win the SEC. But they have won the East, and I mean, they were top 5.
East is going away, man.
No, that's true. But I mean, they were good that year, regardless of what division they were in. I mean, they probably don't win the West, but that was a weird year, 2013. A lot of weird things happened. I guess they won it twice. They won 2013 and 2014. So
yeah, I can't wait to see how they do this, because it's going to be a train wreck how they decide who makes the SEC title game. Like, it's going to be a train wreck deciding how they do this when they break up the divisions. Like, it's going to be so controversial that first year they do it, because there's going to be so much infighting. And then there's going to be fan bases that are like, no, keep us out. Like, we think we're going to the playoff anyway. We don't care. Like, I'm not playing the SEC title game. Like, we're going to have teams sitting players. I'm 100% ready for this. Where teams who think that they're definitely in the playoff, they're like, yeah, no, he's not playing. Like, we're sitting this one out. We're taking an L on this one in the conference title game. I do think that we're going to see that.
I don't know about that. I mean, we'll see, but I think
like, if you're Tennessee last year and you play LSU and you already beat them, and like, why? Just, I mean, in a 12-team playoff situation, like, you're sitting Hendon Hooker and company.
Because you want the SEC and get a bye. Like, that's a pretty huge. You get a top 4 seed. That's a big deal. Competition, sir. We don't need these guys. Don't just need a lot of reasons to play and stuff. Like, just the actual competition. Like, these dudes live for that. Like, you're not just gonna like not value winning the Southeastern Conference. Like, it's always gonna be a big deal.
Vanderbilt, last one here, Matt Green.
Absolutely. They should finish 7th in the East every single year. And if they don't, it's a home run.
I think last year was a home run for them. You get to see Florida and Kentucky go down to you. Like, that's a great year for Vandy. Getting both of those. You're usually hoping only for one. I think that's about right.
Ruin a couple team seasons. Yeah. It's basically as good as you can ask for.
For sure. Most underrated.
And why are you going around scheduling Kansas State? What are you doing? You're never gonna. Oh shoot, that was Missouri. I was looking at the wrong schedule. Who did Vanderbilt play at a conference?
They got Hawaii again. I know that.
I think they played somebody, a Power 5 school at a conference.
Do they have Wake Forest again?
Oh, they did play Wake Forest. Yeah, they do play them again in 2023. So that's who they lost to.
They go to UNLV. Wake. This conference schedule, non-conference, is pretty soft. Hawaii.
Yeah, they got Hawaii, Elon, Northern
Illinois.
They get one more automatic dub on that schedule, and those 2 conference wins are putting them bowling. So,
well, here's the problem.
Bad call. Although I love Wake Forest and Vanderbilt playing, so don't get it twisted.
Here's the problem. I think they're losing 6 straight to end the season. At Florida, Georgia at home, at Ole Miss, Auburn at home, at South Carolina, at Tennessee.
I mean, I basically expect them to lose every conference game they ever play, so I won't be surprised.
The most underrated player in the SEC East in 2023 was who for you, Matt Green?
I got to go with a homer pick here. I got to go Kenny McIntosh. Third player in the history of the SEC to have 800 rushing yards, 500 receiving yards, and 10 plus touchdowns in one season, along with Dexter McCluster and Percy Harvin. So this guy was just, I feel like because of the way Georgia kind of blew out teams and, spread the ball around, I feel like he kind of got lost of how just dynamic he was as an individual player. Because I think he's probably the best Georgia running back individually since probably DeAndre Swift. Like, I think he's better than Zamir White or James Cook. And he's just a really dynamic running back. So I got to go Kenny McIntosh because he didn't get the first team, second team type love, but I wouldn't be surprised if this guy turns into a good NFL running back.
Okay. I don't hate that. I'm going to go Barry and Brown. I think Barry and Brown, 50 receptions, 628 yards, 4 TDs, dangerous returning kicks. It was just always a big play threat, and he was just a sneaky glue guy to keeping Kentucky, whatever they had going. He was the only one that scared you on that Kentucky team all season long, and he was Will Levis's only real consistent target that he could count on to keep their season afloat. Barry and Brown was a really good player, and he was just dangerous in special teams, dangerous deep. I don't know. Barry and Brown each week was the sneaky guy on your scouting report where I'm like, I think this guy's really awesome. And if he was in a better situation in 2022, people would be like, oh, we got to find a Barry and Brown on our team. You can never have enough of those kind of guys.
Also, I'm just going to say it. You're going to say this is crazy. It's so much hype. Somehow Brock Bowers is still the answer to this.
That's enough.
This guy is
not happening.
Absurd.
We're not doing that. The most underrated player, Matt Green. You're doing this.
It's still not.
You're doing this.
Credit, but it's still not even realized how truly special he is. When does Brock Bowers start to get talk of greatest college football player of all time?
Oh my God!
If Georgia wins a 3rd national championship and this guy's in college for 3 years and he's maybe the best player on a team that wins 3 straight natties, you got to start to have a legacy conversation, right? Dead serious. Not saying he is that, but hypothetically, if Georgia does do that, what do you say? I've hijacked this conversation, but I want to know your thoughts.
No, he's a tight end. What are we talking about?
You can't be one of the greatest players in college football history as a tight end?
No, you can't. You don't impact the game enough. No, can't do it. No.
I don't know how you can say that.
He hasn't even been the most impactful player on Georgia the last 2 years.
I think he's been Georgia's best player each of the last 2 years.
No, Jalen Carter was a better player than him this past year.
He's the best player on Georgia's offense each of the last 2 years, and he only plays offense. So
I think Stetson Bennett was more valuable this year than Brock Bowers.
I mean, he's a quarterback, so that you could make the argument, but Brock Bowers, if they win a 3rd national title,
Lad McConkey maybe in some ways.
No chance, man. Brock Bowers, he was the leading receiver for one, and he also people forget what.
Why
he did
am I entertaining this?
Game. People forget what he did in the running game.
Can you wake up for this? Matt Green's lost it.
Real talk. If they win a 3rd national championship, what are we doing here in sports?
I mean, then it's just Kirby's really mastered the sport. It's not Brock Bowers was extremely underrated and is the guy. What?
Except for Brock Bowers. Well, I mean, the underrated thing. That was half
Tennessee
kidding.
just took him out of the game. He was a non-factor in the Tennessee game.
No, we didn't need him. We didn't need him to
here we
beat
go.
Tennessee.
He gets to
had
pick and choose.
guys.
He picks and chooses when they need Brock Bowers.
I mean, if your team wins in a blowout, it doesn't really matter if you take someone away. Like clearly the other guys were enough to get the job done. You can't really. They didn't do anything to shut down Georgia's offense in any way, is all I'm saying. Like Georgia's offense moved the ball a good amount in that game. But I'm just saying, hypothetically, as a separate conversation, if Georgia wins a third straight national championship, it would be with a new quarterback, like probably a different leading rusher all 3 of those years, like, you know, some of the same, obviously, overlap on the offensive line. But
these are all testaments to Kirby, not Brock Bowers.
No. But I'm saying Brock Bowers is the one constant. Like he's part of that every time. If they do win a third straight national championship, the conversation has to be had. Like
Kendall Milton's also been a part of all of it,
but he was never, unless obviously this year he could be one of the better players. But he wasn't even one of the best players on either of the last 2 championship teams. He was a contributor, by no means disrespect to Kendall Milton, but he wasn't. Was he the second leading rusher? I'm not even sure. I'm not looking at Georgia's stats.
I feel like it's probably Robinson was there, or Edwards. I would guess Edwards. Dejon Edwards.
I would say Edwards was probably the second leading rusher too, behind McIntosh. That's what I'm saying. Like Matt Bowers will have been the leading receiver most likely for a third straight season, and I think a lot of it depends on what he does. If he has a statistical jump, like what he's done the first 2 years is good. It's not going to be enough to be in the Heisman, other than he's got the reputation of just being a really good player, and that's part of the Heisman campaign. So if he has a year of like double-digit touchdowns and 60, 70 catches or something like that, maybe 1,000 yards receiving, I 100% think he'll be a Heisman finalist. Like I don't think it matters that he's a tight end. Like Travis Kelce's a tight end. Like you've never seen a tight end play like that before. So the tight end, like Kyle Pitts, honestly should have been a Heisman finalist that year. I think he was the best player on Florida's team. So I don't think being a tight end like excludes you from any greatest of all time conversations.
I will say he looks like someone from South Georgia, and this man is from California. It always kind of blows my mind just looking at and hearing him talk. Brock Bowers, there's nothing California about Brock Bowers. He even has a name that's like just a South Georgia, like a Colquitt County tight end name, Brock Bowers.
Yeah, I could. He definitely doesn't seem like JT Daniels had that cool California kind of attitude. He definitely seems more, no disrespect to Brock Bowers, but he definitely seems like the more like meathead jock kind of persona. Yeah. Like he's just like, I run, I catch ball. Like I'm
more of a Gronk guy.
I play football. Like I don't know. Like you try to get an answer from him. He's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just playing. I'm just doing my thing.
Most overrated player in 2023 in the SEC East was who, Matt Green?
So this was an interesting one. The easy answer is to say Will Levis or Anthony Richardson. But if you're an SEC football fan, you'd never overrated them. You never thought that they were any good. It's only the NFL people that think that they're good. So there was never a time in college where either of those guys was overrated. This is going to be a hot take here, sir. I'm going to go Jalen Hyatt. Only because I don't think Jalen Hyatt is just far and away the best receiver in the SEC, like his numbers and accolades would suggest. Like I think Cedric Tillman will be a better receiver in the NFL. I just think he's like a more just physically gifted wide receiver. So I don't think Jalen Hyatt is truly like the Biletnikoff, like that elite of elite player. I think he was like
the 5 touchdowns against Alabama wasn't enough for you.
The system, like I don't want to disrespect everything he accomplished. And I will say, I was racking my brain for overrated. It was hard for me to necessarily come up with someone I truly found overrated. So if I had to pick someone, I don't necessarily think Jalen Hyatt is that overrated. But if I had to pick someone, I don't think he's truly as good as kind of the accolades and things he got in 2022.
67 catches, 15 TDs. He averaged almost 20 yards a catch.
No, I know the numbers. The numbers are fantastic, but we know Josh Heupel in his system as well. So it's like, there's this conversation to be had about everyone that's coming through Tennessee. Is Hendon Hooker a baller? Is he a product of the system? It's like it's a little bit of both. Like I'm sure it's a little bit of both. But Jalen Hyatt, he just doesn't seem like that true guy that's like a special talent that's going to be, a baller at the next level. Like you look at the guys who are winning Biletnikovs. Like I don't know, I have the list off the top of my head, but typically those are the elite of the elite that become first round picks and NFL studs. So
Hyatt is gonna be a first round pick.
I'm just this is my opinion. This is my guy for who's your guy for overrated?
Spencer Rattler.
I don't think we know Hyatt is going to be a first round pick. I don't think that's a guarantee.
I think it is a guarantee based on I haven't seen a mock with Jalen Hyatt not in the first round lately.
We'll see. Those mocks are always so dependable.
I think Spencer Rattler was the most overrated player coming in 2023.
Oh, you think so?
18 TDs total, 12 picks. He needed every last bit of those last 2 games to avoid just a really disastrous 2022 season. He came in 2021. Remember, he completed 74% of his passes in 2021. He got benched, obviously, but the yards per attempt was about the same, 7.6, 7.9. He only completed 66% of his passes. He had some bad losses in there. You get crushed at Florida. One of the worst offensive showings, 5.6 yards per attempt, 145 yards total. I mean, he had some stinkers, barely beaten Vanderbilt on the road. Like, yes, they blew out, dropped 63 on Tennessee. He had 8 TDs in his final 2 games in the regular season, Matt Green. That he had 10 TDs and 12 picks coming into that last 2 weeks. His QBR was 65th in the country. 65th. He's just, he was overrated where people were like, oh, he's coming in from Oklahoma. Sure, he got benched, but look, Caleb Williams, he won the Heisman this year. It's like it's not like he got benched for, I don't know, just insert like Nick Fitzgerald or something. Like that's not what happened there. They were like, okay, they're both great. You can't have 2 quarterbacks in the field was the narrative, right? It's just like they're getting a 5-star Heisman type quarterback in South Carolina, and that's the difference maker. He was not even close to being a Heisman type quarterback at South Carolina. He is not sniffing a first round mock. There's a reason he's back at South Carolina this year. I think Spencer Rattler is okay. He's better than what South Carolina's had for the majority of our lifetime. Like the best versions of Spencer Rattler, still a really good player, but the consistency is not there. It's never been there. I don't see a star there. I don't think he's that guy. I think that he was good down the stretch, but the majority of 2022, he was a below average SEC quarterback.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would struggle to call him overrated because I don't know how many people think he's good.
I think a lot of people remember coming into last year he was rated
coming
in
into
a lot
last year. I'll agree with you.
Look at the list last year. If you go back through last summer, it's like best quarterback in the SEC coming into last year. Like he was number 1 on a lot of lists. Like Spencer Rattler at South Carolina was number 1 on a lot of people's lists.
Going into the year, I will agree with you.
That's
that
what
he
I'm
was
saying.
Definitely overrated. But yeah, after the year, I think he's probably more properly rated just because most people think he's kind of garbage. And then he's like, I don't know. He's shown some signs like the Tennessee and the Clemson game, but other than that, it's been a lot of bad performances. Like that Florida game, like we just completely forget the Florida game where they were just absolutely just obliterated from the first minute of the game. After those final 2 wins over Tennessee and Clemson. So yeah, I'm with you that I definitely don't expect like anything really better than what he's been so far. It's like at what point do we stop calling guys 5 stars? It's like we called Stetson Bennett a walk-on for like 5 years. It's like, okay, he was also on scholarship for like 4 years. You know what I mean? Like at some point you're no longer a 5-star. Like Brenton Cox was a 5-star. The guy stayed in college for like 6 years, because he shouldn't have been a 5-star. Like it's at some point what you thought a guy was coming out of high school just isn't really that important. JT Daniels, yeah, he was a 5-star, but I think we can all agree that guy is not a 5-star. That's why he's going to be playing football at Rice next year, while Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields are in like their third year in the NFL. It's like they were the other 5-stars in that class. So, at some point, Spencer Rattler is just a college quarterback, and he's kind of an average one.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Final question for you here. This has been fun. I like this. And we'll do the West next week on the pod. This is fun. The most difficult spot for this coach to be in entering 2023 based on what happened in 2022 is who for you, Matt Green?
I want to hear your answer first on this one and see where you go with it. So let me bounce my answer off of you. So you go first.
I think it's Shane Beamer, because I think folks remember so much how you finish, and there was so much optimism and so much hype. You beat Clemson, you beat Tennessee, and end their CFP opportunity. Like, there's a lot of we turn the corner hype around South Carolina right now. And they have the number one most difficult schedule in college football coming into 2023. They have to come back to Tennessee this year. I think they go to Georgia, right? That game's in Athens this year, I believe. Like, you go through that schedule, they're not beating Clemson back-to-back years. I just think they're due for a major regression, and that bump we saw at the end of last year is not indicative of what's going to happen with South Carolina. Lost some big impact players, both in the defensive line, out wide. I'm pretty dubious about where South Carolina goes in 2023. So I think Beamer, like, he shut up a lot of doubters by winning those two important games down the stretch of like, we're like, this is huge for us and we can play with the big dogs. But it's also like, I don't think next year is going to be good. So I think because there was so much optimism, he's going to be looked at in a way, or in South Carolina is going to be looked at in a way where they're going to be a trendy offseason. Ooh, could Spencer Rattler's back? Could they really challenge Tennessee and Kentucky and Florida for that number 2 spot in the East? Like, there's a lot of folks who, like, no one's putting them with Georgia. No one's doing that for anybody in the East right now. But I think that is something where it's like, oh, they should be able to do that. And I think there's a very strong possibility South Carolina loses to not only Tennessee, which is a guarantee in Knoxville in the sun or in September, but also Florida and Kentucky. Like, that would not surprise me either. And then Clemson, obviously. So I don't know. I think South Carolina and Shane Beamer is my pick here.
See, I think the only reason I'll disagree with that in a way is because I think fans can be illogical, but they're not just downright dumb. And I think people know that they have the number one toughest schedule in college football, and I think that's built in, like, to the expectations. And it's like, I feel like when you want to fire a coach, it's not a results, a win-loss record thing. It's like how you feel. You know what I mean? And it's like, this team could go 7-5, and as a South Carolina, you'd have so many of those toss-up games that you actually won that you'd actually feel pretty good by the end of it, and you wouldn't be like, oh, we went 7-5, we went 8-5 last year, so this is bad. This is a worse year. It'd be like, wow, we lost what we did in the portal, and we had a ridiculously tough schedule, and we did what we did. So I don't know if Beamer's under the worst, in the worst position, just because I think there is some logic being used by the fans in Columbia, even if we can all be like irrational, illogical sports fans from time to time. I think there is some leeway that you start with like the first 6 games. It's like North Carolina game 1, at Georgia, Mississippi State, at Tennessee, Florida. Like, you're going to know what kind of season it is from the jump. So it's also like, you have that year where you start 2-4 and you end up 7-6 or something. And you're like, oh, that was actually, we could have given up on the season. and the guys rallied together and got good wins down the stretch or something like that you can kind of spin as a fan. So Shane Beamer, I understand what you're saying, and it's going to be hard to match what they did in 2023, but I don't, or in 20, yeah, it's what they did last year, but I don't know that they necessarily have to. I think.
So who's your pick here?
I think the most difficult, I think Napier is the easy answer because Florida just feels like kind of a dumpster fire, but that's not where I'm going.
Okay.
And year 2 is where you expect, an improvement lots of times. I'm a big year 2 head coach guy. You know that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be Josh Heupel because
oh wow, I did not see this coming.
He may have gotten too good too early. And that's kind of what happened to Dan Mullen, where Dan Mullen they went 10-3 year 1, and he started talking shit to Kirby Smart in the spring game, and Florida fans like, oh, it's on then. Like, our coach is talking shit. Like, it's time. Like, we're ready to be the villain. Like, let's go. And it's like, no, you weren't really ready. I feel like Dan Mullen kind of got Florida fans' expectations like ahead of schedule where they should have been. It's like, we're just trying to get better every year, whatever, coach speak. With Heupel doing what he did and beating Alabama year 2, obviously the loss in South Carolina brings people a little bit down to earth, but doing what he did year 2, going 11-2, I think there's an expectation that this is who we are now as Tennessee. Like, we're second to Georgia and absolutely nobody else. Like, yeah, we think we could beat Georgia, but if we don't, we're second and no one else is on our level. We're right there, just second in the East. And I think I don't know if they've recruited necessarily well enough to just automatically assume like, yeah, our bad years are going to be 9-3, and the good years we can be 11-1 or something like that. Like, I think there's a chance that this was a spike year, that Hendon Hooker was a generational talent, that Jalen Hyatt was a generational talent, that you can't replace some of that personnel offensively that was the number 1 offense in college football. Like, not just a really good offense, the number 1 offense in college football. Like, there's a reason, there's a rational reason to think that the offense won't be as good next year, right? Maybe they're top 10 nationally. Maybe they're scoring 41 points a game. But then they need to see a significant improvement on the defense if they're not going to be scoring 50 points every game. So I think Heupel, just don't get me wrong, Heupel is in a great position, and Tennessee fans would have to love where their program is at right now and where the trajectory appears to be. But it's just where the trajectory appears to be. You have to see what he continues to do, and he's definitely put the expectations as, we're a college football playoff contender type of program now.
I think it's too soon. I think it's too soon to say. I think for everyone here in Knoxville is like, this is kind of a gap year. I think people are kind of like, he's still recruiting pretty well. Like, they're a top 10 class this past year. I think they'll probably be at the top 10. It looks like maybe even a little bit better with the 2024 class. But I think they're just going to wait on Nico.
Where do they finish in 2023? Like
10th, I think.
9, 10 or something?
Yeah. So they're right there in the blue chip ratio.
Looks like 9th, I think.
Yeah. They bring in Rico. All right. They bring in Nico. I think that's where things get dicey. Like, if Nico doesn't develop into a superstar, and that is not like a Bryce Young type find, then it's like, all right. Because if this year is kind of like an 8-4 type year, and then they get through the Milton bump, and then they go to Nico next year after a full year in the system, and Nico in this group doesn't gel, and they still don't get over the hump, and they're not really challenging for the East, but the East won't exist at that point. But if they're not looking at 10-2, 11-1 with Nico in either of those runs where they're not feeling like a contender, then it gets dicey. Like, then it gets uncomfortable. I don't think Tennessee fans are going to start to panic or feel a type of way. It's also, they need to see this offense not be elite. Like, they were number 1 this past year in offense, and they were top 10 the year before that. Like, until that happens, until the offense really starts regressing or teams really start figuring them out and they have to adjust more, and it's like, hey, this way you got to evolve a little bit, Heupel, to like keep folks like believing that this is sustainable. I think fans are going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen this offense not be super explosive, top 10, and we saw the best version of it last year. I think we're still at least a year away from, probably 2, from any kind of real hot seat stuff. He just got a gigantic extension from Tennessee. So for me, I
Oh
don't
yeah, no
think
hot
so.
seat by any means, but it's an interesting position to be in terms of, because Tennessee is not.
This is why you want to be in everything school,
Tennessee's
Matt
not
Green.
South Carolina. They're not Kentucky.
This is why you want to be in everything school, because when you're good at basketball, you're flirting with the Final Four. When you have one of the best college baseball programs in the country, one of the best softball programs in the country, one of the best women's basketball programs in the country, one of the best rowing teams in the country, one of the best track and field teams in the country, the list goes on, that there's not as much pressure on the football program to make it that sustainable win-win-win model, because everything's good. So
they're
fans
pretty
are
good at
fine.
everything. That's a good thing to have. But that don't get it twisted. Football is always king, and
Yeah, for sure.
they expect national title contention at Tennessee, and Heupel is getting them as close as they've been
Since
in a long
Fulmer.
damn time. So I mean, Butch Jones had his pop-up year where they were like at least interesting, but so Heupel is obviously in a good position. The Tennessee program is in a good position right now, but there is such thing as being a victim of your own success. And I think, and it's not to compare everything Florida was doing at Dan Mullen to Heupel. It's just there are some parallels there with both of them being, just these offensive kind of mastermind type of coaches, and also recruiting at a very similar level.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably say Florida had better talent when Dan Mullen got there than Josh Heupel did for Tennessee. But there was the 10-win season year 1, the 11-win season year 2, and then the 8-4. But it was an improvement. The COVID year makes the record look kind of funny, but the year that they did win the SEC East in year 3, so we had that national trajectory, that natural trajectory, and then you had no idea that it was falling apart by the end of that season, where at the end of your breakthrough season, everything started to fall apart. So the Florida thing could be a very, unique situation with Dan Mullen's personality and who he was, meshing with administration and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think Florida was recruiting at a level that wasn't sustainable to compete for the SEC year in and year out. And that it kind of did Dan Mullen in. And so I think if Heupel, can keep this going, and it's, maybe next year is the bad year and you go 9-3 or you go 10-2 and it feels disappointing, then maybe Tennessee has arrived at an SEC championship or bust type of level. But that's definitely where the expectation is. And we know Tennessee's got a rowdy fan base. So, after that taste they got in 2022, they definitely want more.
That's fair. And as they should, because like I said, there's no reason they can't be Clemson. And that's where they want to be, football wise. So we'll see. We'll see, Matt Green.
The biggest difference also is Florida never got the 5-star quarterback. I mean, I guess Emory Jones was a big time recruit.
He wasn't the number one overall player in the
Anthony Richardson was like whatever. They talked about him, but Nico being by someone's ranking the number one overall player.
On
right?
3 had him as number one overall player.
So that's a guy who maybe that's their Deshaun Watson, and that's the guy that can elevate their program into being a true national title contender.
Oof, that just brings me joy. Nico just being a nightmare for the Dogs.
It would work real well for your Clemson parallels too, right there.
Yeah. Hey, that's where I'm at, Matt Green. Well, that's fun. That was a fun exercise. We can we'll hit the SEC West next. I will be gone, like I said at the top of the show, over the weekend until Wednesday. So probably Wednesday night is when we'll probably do the West, is what I'm guessing. So we'll shoot for Wednesday night, because I'll get back in Wednesday morning and all that. So look out for that. We'll do the West at that point and keep it going with all kinds of offseason content. There will probably be some other news to discuss before we dive into that and all that good stuff over the next week. Who knows? There might be conference realignment while I'm gone. We'll see. Until then, Matt Green, always a pleasure. Talk to you soon.